Hello everybody, this is John Marshall here. Welcome to this week's short video clip. The question that we'll be addressing this week is, what is the relationship between science and belief in God? The most popular narrative that we find in our culture today is that science and belief in God are incompatible. Some say that science and belief in God are in complete conflict with one another. Some even say that the development of science today in this modern world has made belief in God completely impossible or even unnecessary. Some even say that it's irrational to believe in God in today's age and day. But is this popular narrative true? I believe that this narrative is a myth. It's not true. This narrative is false. Why do I say that? First of all, there is no conflict between science and God. If at all there is a conflict, the conflict is between worldviews. It is between naturalism, which is the most common form of atheism, against theism, which is belief in God. So the conflict is between worldviews. It is not between science and God. Let me illustrate this by using a simple example. Let's consider two prominent physicians of our time. The first one is Professor Stephen Weinberg. He's won the Nobel Prize for Physics. He's a prominent scientist, and he is a naturalist. He's an atheist. Let's consider a second prominent scientist, who is William Phillips or Bill Phillips. He's also won the Nobel Prize for Physics. But in contradistinction to Stephen Weinberg, he's a Christian. Now, let me ask you a question. What divides these two people? Absolutely, it's not their science, because if it's their science that distinguishes both of them, it's false, because both of them have won the Nobel Prize for Physics. So it's not science that divides them. What divides these two people, or these two prominent scientists, are their worldviews. So the first reason why this grand narrative is a myth is because there is actually no conflict between science and belief in God. If the conflict was between science and belief in God, what is Bill Phillips doing in his physics lab? He should abandon science at all because he's a Christian. So this narrative is a myth. Let's look at some statistics now. According to a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center for the People and the Press in May and June 2009, it says that just over half of the scientists, which is 51%, believe in some form of God or higher power. And among them, 33% say they believe in God. The remaining 18% believe in a universal spirit or a higher power. Overall, about 51%, more than half of the scientists who took part in this survey, believe in some form of God. Listen to this carefully now. Of all the scientists, 30% of them are Christians. 20% of them are nothing in particular. 17% of them are atheists, and 11% are agnostic, and 18% come from other religions other than Christianity. Maybe Islam or Hinduism or Jainism or whatever. And 4% refuse to comment on this. What does the statistic tell you? It tells you that there are brilliant scientists. There are scientists who believe in God. So the narrative that if you are a scientist, or if you are a lover of science, you shouldn't be a believer in God is a myth. It is false. If that is the case, why are there 51%? Why the 51% of scientists believe in God? It doesn't make sense. All of the scientists should be naturalists, should be materialists, they should be atheists. So this narrative is a myth. Secondly, is there really a incompatibleness between science and God? I don't think so. Rather, let me tell you that if at all there is incompatibility, it is between naturalism and science. Atheism, or the major form of atheism, which is naturalism or scientific materialism, is completely incompatible with science. They don't go well with each other because they have conflicting ideas. Why do I say that? Because naturalism fundamentally undermines the validity of the very rationality one needs, not only for doing science, but for any thinking whatsoever. And that is the reason why I think naturalism and science are incompatible with each other. They are in conflict with each other. Science fits very well with belief in God, whereas science does not fit well with naturalism or materialism. Now, why do I say that? Now, as I said, that naturalism undermines the very thinking process by which we do science. Why do I say that? How do we think basically? What instrument do we use to think? Of course, our brain. But what's the story of the brain? How did we get the brain? Or where did this brain come from? Let's listen into some of our naturalists. Listen to what Stephen Hawking says. He says, the brain is the end result of a mindless, unguided process that did not have an end in view. Listen to what Richard Dawkins says. He says, the brain is a result of time plus matter plus chance. It's a result of a simple process thrown up in the cosmic lottery, is what he says. Now pause for a second and think about this. What does this mean? Let me ask you a question. Can you trust something, or anything for that matter, that came about as a result of a mindless, unguided process? Think about it. If I told you the computer that you have in front of you is a result of a mindless, unguided process, would you trust it? Think about it. And the naturalists want us to believe that the foundation of thinking itself, which is brain, is a product of a mindless, unguided process. How do we trust that? We are not alone in this page. Actually, Charles Darwin, the evolutionary biologist, had the same doubt. It is famously called the Darwin's doubt. He says, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. He asks, would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are convictions in such a mind at all? So he says that how do we have the conviction that we are actually thinking the right way if our brains are the product of a mindless, unguided process? The very foundation of thinking itself is in question. And that is why I think that naturalism or scientific materialism is incompatible with doing science at all. Because you need thinking, you need to use your brain in order to do science. And naturalism fundamentally undermines the using of human reasoning. Listen to what C.S. Lewis says about this. He says, unless human reasoning is valid, no science can be true. It follows that no account of the universe can be true unless that account leaves it possible for our thinking to be a real insight. And he says, a theory which explained everything else in the whole universe, but which made it impossible to believe that our thinking was valid, would be utterly out of court. Because for that theory would itself have been reached by thinking, and if thinking is not valid, that theory would of course be itself demolished. Any theory that undermines human reasoning, any theory that undermines thinking is false. Because whatever you talk about, whatever discoveries you make is through thinking. And if thinking is not validated, if it is not grounded properly, then that theory is self-destructive. And that is what naturalism and scientific materialism is. And that is why I say that science and naturalism is incompatible with each other. Listen to the atheist philosopher says here, Thomas Nagel. He says, evolutionary naturalism implies that we shouldn't take any of our convictions seriously, including the scientific world picture on which evolutionary naturalism itself depends. Listen to Alvin Plantinga, the analytical philosopher from the University of Notre Dame. He says, if Dawkins is right, that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then he has given a strong reason to doubt the reliability of the human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including Dawkins' own science and his atheism. So the narrative that science and belief in God is incompatible or is in conflict is a myth. It is not true. I've given two reasons. First, there is absolutely no conflict between science and belief in God. The conflict is only between naturalism and theism. They are both completely opposite worldviews. They cannot be reconciled. So the problem is not between science and God. The problem is between naturalism and theism. So that is the issue. So we've been asking the wrong question. It is the clash of worldviews that is taking place here. It is not between science and God. And the second point is that naturalism and science are incompatible with each other. It is not science and belief in God that is incompatible with each other. Why do I say that? Because naturalism or scientific materialism fundamentally undermines the very rationality one needs not only to do science but for any thinking whatsoever. So what is the relationship between science and God? This is important. God is the foundation for all of sciences. He grounds the discipline of science. The very reason that we can do science is grounded, or it can be justified only because God exists. Listen to what Sir John Houghton, a scientist at Oxford, says. He says, our science is God's science. He holds the responsibility for the whole scientific story. The remarkable order, consistency, reliability, and the fascinating complexity found in the scientific description of the universe are reflections of the order, consistency, reliability, and complexity of God's activity. Listen to Richard Swinburne, a philosopher at Oxford. He says, I do not deny that science explains, but I postulate God to explain why science explains. The very success of science in showing us how deeply orderly the natural world is provides strong grounds for believing that there is an even deeper cause for that order. What is the relationship between science and God? God is the explanation for why science explains. That is the relationship between God and science. The foundation for science is God, because science would be impossible. There would be no order, there would be no grounds for doing science at all if God does not exist, if there is no sustainer of the nature. That is the relationship between God and science. I actually did a half-day seminar on this particular topic, the relationship between science and belief in God. We will be uploading that particular video in the next few days. You might want to check that out. And please like and subscribe to our channel in order to listen to more of videos like this. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.